probably hurrah sitting up in front of you, being involved with this group for almost 25 years now. Just done incredible work in concert with the program, and it's really been one of the joyful parts of what I do on a day-to-day basis. This group has made it happen. It's going to get tougher though, particularly for one of our bay segments. So I just hope y'all can continue to cooperate in the spirit that I've watched over the last quarter century. So with that said, I'm Jeff Greenwell, Hillsborough County. I am co-chairs with
Santino Provenzano, industry co-chair with Mosaic. And if you would humor me just for 1 minute, I just wanted to acknowledge, there's going to be a lot of second guessing after these storms and a lot of things we're going to have to figure out. But I know a lot, if not most of the people in this room are directly related to and have been on the back end of a lot of the storm recovery. So I'm sure there's a lot of frazzled nerves, both professionally and personally, and I hope all of you and your families made it through the storm relatively okay. And we've got a lot of work ahead of us as a committee. I think this really changes things in the short term. And as Jeff said, we have some challenges in some certain parts of the bay that we need to continue to work on as a group. And I hope as leadership changes with Jeff moving out of his role and us electing a new co-chair, hopefully today, and eventually doing the same next year with my role, that we continue the good work of this group. And keep in mind what the main objective is to keep the bay healthy and something that we can all be proud of. So, please.
Brandon.
Alyssa Powers, Manatee County.
Marissa Joshua, Hazen Sawyer.
Wendy Thornhill, Pasco County.
Michelle Duggan, Pinellas County.
Drew Boylston, Pinellas County.
Michelle Bolton, Hillsborough County.
Kim Cruz, Hillsborough County.
Ilya Balcom, Duke Energy.
Lisa Ray, Hillsborough County.
Donna Jan, City of Oldsmar.
Julie Christian, Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County.
Stacy Day, Pinellas County.
Aaron Lotion, Kinder Morgan.
Jeff Hilton, City of Tampa.
Aaron DeBacco, Kinder Morgan. Ray Gribble, ESA.
Troy Green, Hillsborough County. David Glucksberg, Hillsborough County.
Sharon Yu, Stantec.
Yeah, you can do online too. I'll call them out.
I got it.
Peter Owens, Applied Sciences.
Megan Blanchard.
Megan Blanchard, Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council.
Brooke Driscoll.
Gabriella, representative of the receivership at Piney Point.
Alana Todd.
Hi, Alana Todd with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council.
Carrie Lopez.
Carrie Lopez, Florida Fish and Wildlife Research Institute.
Chris Anastasio.
Yeah, hey everybody, Chris A. Swiftmud. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today.
Alicia Burks. Greg Nosey.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Sorry. Greg Knolfi, Polk County Natural Resources, Underwater Resources Project Manager.
Heather Bryan. Heather Maggio.
Heather Maggio with the City of Tampa. Good morning.
Jessica Schilling.
Good morning, Jessica Schilling with the Lakes and Stormwater Division for Lakes, City of Lakeland.
Kara Barrera.
Kira Barrera, Special Projects Coordinator, City of St. Pete Water Resources Department.
Christy Martinez.
Sorry, trouble with my audio. Kirsty Martinez, Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County.
Sarah Wakefield.
Hi, Laura Wakefield, Pasco County.
Mike Wessel.
Mike Wessel, ESA.
Miles Medina.
Miles Medina, Echo Scientific.
Molly Kleinpeter.
Molly Kleinpeter, City of Lakeland Water Utilities.
Nicole Maloney.
Hi, Nicole Maloney, Pinellas County.
RJ. Rob Brown. Shelby Boschman,
Shelby Boschman, City of Largo.
Jerry Hulster,
Sherry Hilster, Stantec.
Simon Bolin,
Simon Boland, Hillsborough County Extension.
Sarah Malone,
Sarah Malone, Applied Ecology.
Sugandha Shankar,
Sugandha Shankar, Fish and Wildlife Research Institute.
Ksenia Scribano,
Good morning, FDAC's Office of Agwater Policy, Jasenia Scribano.
if there's anyone that calling.
Hi, Maya. This is Felicia Burks with EPA. I had some audio problems, but I'm back on now.
Thanks, Felicia.
I'm Brooke Driscoll, City of Largo, Stormwater Program Administrator. I had audio issues.
Hi there, this is Stephanie Issue from Hazelman Sawyer.
This is Steve Bartell with Stantec. I may have missed my name being called.
I think that's everyone.
There's 14 entities.
I think the first item on the agenda of the local government co-chair. So Ed, you do such a good job of herding the cats, so.
It's according to the NMC's official voting protocol that we developed on the heels of the 2009 RA agenda. Each entity represented in the consortium is entitled to a vote. We're coming up with a decision. Consortium, the co-chair business decision point. So there's 14 entities represented in the room. We're going to try to do this vote through a Mentimeter. And the total vote count can only be, so if there's multiple folks from the room, please confer and then cast a vote accordingly for one of the co-chair nomination. And we do have nominations, Michelle Dugan, Ellis County, will actually Painter. Hello, Michelle. Words about your interest in the government co-chair. Figuring that out.
Yes, I think that we really need to have that balance between wastewater and water and then. So I understand RA document work.
That she was not going to be able to.
Well, I mean, I'm not, I mean, Ashley is well qualified to, for that position. I'm not really sure what else to add. She's at a conference today.
With that, we have a nomination for the government. I'm gonna pull up a menu. You want to take like a couple minutes to confer with your entity about the two nominations and see which one you would like to go for the end.
You can vote. I'll just abstain if you want to do the vote.
We have to, hold on.
Yeah, we're gonna get the main meter.
It's weird. Oh, you got it.
They just coordinate.
It's in the chat.
Okay.
In a busy.
Yeah. Not sure. We're in the room, Ed. we go over to where Maya or where do we?
Sorry, if you go to Mentee dot. And enter in this code.
Yeah, Michelle's it.
Michelle Holton.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's the Michelle I'm talking about. Michelle Holton's the Hillsborough voter.
Okay, so when do we go to? I can't.
Yeah, if you just go to mentimeter.com, MENTIMETER, and then you should be able to enter the code once you get on that screen.
I could. Go to mentimeter.com. The code there is gonna be 43442794.
Can you repeat that again, please?
43442794.
Thank you.
Should be presented with the choice. Again, only one vote per entity, so if you have multiple votes in the room, then the entity, please confer with them before you cast your vote.
Sorry, the code one more time?
279.
Yeah, and that's just so.
We're at seven of 14.
Yeah, what's it?
Eight of 14 is represented.
Not yet.
Still signing up. Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead.
guys.
Oh, you shouldn't have to sign up.
That's what it says you do.
There's, yes, but at the very top, it asks for the code and you can just drop the code in without doing names and addresses.
Thank you, Julie. We're at 10 entities represented, and we have 11 entities. We have a majority. I think. That's how the math went.
Already for Michelle.
Congratulations.
Well, that was quick, Jeff.
I was gonna say.
That was like a little spring. Lots of words, but.
Water bottle and his ASICs and he was like.
You're gonna stay?
But I do want to express my appreciation for Jeff, for your time involvement with Consortium, the Hillsborough County state device for 20+ years in the Consortium, if not more. We can stay involved with the Consortium in our activities. The years. You've
It's been
been,
an honor, Ed. It's been an honor, actually.
thank you very much.
He's online.
Share.
Yep, we're good.
Yeah, so looking for contributions for this 2020. Right now we have things that contributed to amount 193,000. The contract amount that we're looking to achieve in terms of the total funds raised about 240,000, I believe. So we're still looking in terms of overall for this round of the regional insurance update. If your entity contributed, please let us know if you need to be re-invoiced. We Consortium by basically tomorrow, October 30th, so that we can finalize the contract provider here, but really to ensure we really move through the reasonable insurance update. And again, as part of this reasonable assurance update, we ask each of the entities representing the consortium a declaration of cooperation. Familiar with that, we'll figure you how to navigate to where that declaration of cooperation is on our website. So it's our main website. You could actually go down to boards and committees under our management consortium. It has all the history of the regional assurance documents, and decision memos, meetings that are under NMC publications. There's going to be a 2020 cooperation. That's basically the template that we ask your entities to consider signing up this year. And this is basically towards working together towards this 20. There's Sorghum Bay segment to be a little bit newer to consider in this round. So again, it's appreciated if your entity signs up cooperation. So far, we only have 18 entities that have signed on, looking to get around these to low represented in the room and that have participated in the meetings in the past. Again, this is not committing your entity to a specific change in your permit or anything like that. It's just requesting that we work collaborative. 1990s, I'm working on these in also, you're going to contribute towards the reasonable assurance update with that nominal amount that we set going into it. If you 7,500 towards the development of the SAR. To develop the decision memos that manifest from at the end of 20. So contributed to the for this round of the reason. Please consider that as soon as possible. If you need us to re-invoice your entity, we could do that. And we'll probably do that for it. Invoice in front of those that are participating in the recording but have not. So with that, is there any questions on any of that? The deadline that we're to receive is to fully fund the contractor. Any questions? Any concerns? I think we could go into this. That would help, huh? So I think going on to the next agenda item is the sort of standing issue on the floor for the consortium. We've been working with Stantec to develop an assessment capacity assessment for the old Tampa Bay segment. On the heels of developing the last regional assurance update, that bay segment was failing to meet the chlorophyll A regulatory threshold or NNC for that bay segment for, it was 3 straight years, right? I believe. So that sort of triggered this assessment of what is the right nutrient diet now for that bay segment. And there's a series of tasks that we entered into contract with Stantec to develop over the course of this calendar year. It'll probably bleed over into early 2025 before we develop the addendum that we'll deliver to DEP and EPA on our recommendations on how to move forward with making sure that bay segment gets back on track in terms of meeting water quality conditions, supportive of seagrass growth, as well as other indicators of nutrient impairments in that bay segment. So I'm going to call up Brandon Johnson with Stantec, who's going to go over task 2, which was pretty much the meat of the contract of developing recommendations for that bay segment based on observed conditions and some of the monitoring data that we've had in that bay segment for quite some time. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and give me a second. I'll set it up where it's presenting correctly. What do you see, my? All right. About now. Yeah. All right. All yours.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Just real quick, just to pile on what Santino was saying. Good to see everybody. Hope everybody made it through the storm okay. I think it's pretty unprecedented times. We're not going to get into effects and things like that to bay segments and that can of worms, but hope everybody's doing well with that physically and mentally. That was certainly a big event for us. I will say I was a little disappointed. I don't see a lot of costumes this close to Halloween. Oh, they're good. Well, I was gonna dress up as like the sexy pyridinium cyst, but I thought Ed might be wearing the same thing, so I didn't want to conflict. This is we presented a couple of months ago in, was it August? And that was a preliminary stage in the development of our task 2 report. So this is kind of, that's why it says part 2 up there. This is a little bit of follow-up. We're still in draft form, but we wanted to come to you all with some of the recommendations that have come out of this task, which were the intended scope of this task. So this is a little bit of a continuation of that presentation with updates and changes as appropriate. I go down for the.
See the right arrow.
Nope. There. Okay. All right, I'll just do it that way. So a little bit of agenda, just going through the existing indicators, targets, and thresholds. Our changes that we're recommending, including new targets and the path forward, looking ahead at task 3, some of the efforts there. And then just a quick review, just so we're all on the same page. Again, some definitions. The indicators are the measurable water quality or ecological variables that we're talking about. Targets are non-regulatory management criteria, assumed to have significant ecological outcomes. And then thresholds are those regulatory mandates, which are used to establish essentially the minimum values. And then if you'll see, I'll just click to the next slide. This is intended as a review of the report. So one of the things that we've done, if you take a look up at the top of the slide, we've tried to indicate the things that I'm going to be talking about, the items that are on the slides. We've tried to indicate where you can find those in the report. And I assume this presentation is going to be available to everyone. Yeah, on the share drive right now. So again, just some of the other things I'll go through, we've tried to organize it a little bit so you can see what parts we're talking about. But if you need to refer back in the report, you can look at those sections. So one of the items we've looked at in task 1 and then again here in task 2 was the management paradigm for Old Tampa Bay. The black boxes are the existing management paradigm, and the concept of reduced nitrogen loads lead to a reduction in chlorophyll, increased water clarity, and increase in seagrass cover. That paradigm, we understand, is at its basis is still valid. Through this effort with task 2, we did include some updates to this paradigm, and a little bit of a spoiler. Those are essentially kind of 3 of the 4 of our or 2 of the 4 of our recommendations that came out of this task. But just wanted to show how those wrap into the existing paradigm. So moving ahead, these are the existing indicators, thresholds, and targets as they stand. The 2 that are unhighlighted or highlighted, depending on how you view it, but total nitrogen and chlorophyll are what we're concentrating on. That's what we took a look at kind of all the existing indicators, but those are the ones we focused on for these recommended changes. And it's a little preview there on what the changes are going to be or that we are recommending. I want to be clear that we are not recommending changing the TMDL. Rather, the recommendation tied to total nitrogen is a change in the expression of that of attainment to that indicator. And then for chlorophyll, we're looking at adding additional management targets to 2 subsegments, and those would be seasonal targets as well. We'll get into more details on those.
That change or that recommended, update of new management targets does not really bear on the consortium too much because the NNC is the regulatory threshold of 9.3 micrograms per liter. What they're recommending for management target is sort of additional layer of assessment that the X-ray program can do and convey to the community in terms of progress of meeting these other recommendations that they're going to explain.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So looking at the hydrologically normalized versus absolute loads for total nitrogen and how that reflects on opportunities to attain the chlorophyll A targets. You guys have probably seen these graphs before. This is showing the hydrologically normalized versus the total nitrogen loads on the graph on the left. You can see that the nitrogen load and the hydrologic loads in Old Tampa Bay, there's a disconnect that exists, and where an absolute load is exceeded because of the high volume of water that's coming in. That increase in hydrologic input into the bay is leading to excess nitrogen above the existing TMDL. The disconnect can be explained kind of on the right again by the evidence of that hydrologic load coming in. And so even though the actual load is being exceeded, the delivery rate is attained. And oh, I moved on there. Can I go back? There we go. And that disconnect between normalized and absolute loads is what drove us to look at that. This slide, these graphs, let me put these up, are a little bit busy here, but what we wanted to show here is that there is a clear relationship between attainment of the chlorophyll A target or thresholds and absolute total nitrogen compared to the normalized load. The graphs up above, again, left and right is the management target, the right is the regulatory threshold. What you can see is that there's tighter compliance with those probability of attaining that chlorophyll A target or threshold when using an absolute load versus the graphs on the bottom show that normalized load. The blue and the black dotted lines are not that important here, but just for information, the blue dotted line is the TMDL of 486 tons per year. And then the black dotted line is kind of a worst case scenario. I believe it was 2015. Let's see when it was because of the high hydrologic load that year, ended up with 876 tons of total nitrogen. And again, this is just try to show a visual relationship that on the top graphs, you can see the range of probability of attaining that chlorophyll A target versus that normalized load obscures that probability a little bit more. So again, just a quick note on the slides here. This is one of our recommendations. So we've numbered them and put them in red up above. So if you want to kind of follow along in that regard. The recommendation is to use an absolute total nitrogen load rather than hydrologic normalized. That normalization, as we just described, the normalization can result in TN loads that can almost double the absolute load depending on that hydrologic input. That was the case in that 2015 year. That excess nitrogen can spike chlorophyll A concentrations, resulting in that non-attainment of that chlorophyll A threshold. And so attaining the total nitrogen target or threshold in absolute terms of the existing TMDL provides opportunity to significantly reduce those chlorophyll A concentrations and attain that chlorophyll A target. Let's see here. This is particularly evident in some of the Old Tampa Bay subsegments, which we'll get into those here shortly. But just want to bring that up there. This slide demonstrates, let's see, the thing to take away from this is that essentially 2/3 of the loading in Old Tampa Bay is occurring in 1/3 of the year. Those summer wet season months are the primary time frame of concern when looking at those nitrogen loads. The graph here is showing the blue line would be the average TN if of the existing TMDL if spaced out over a calendar month, and the red line is or vice versa. I'm sorry, the blue line is the actual data from 2000 to 2021, and the red line would be the TMDL spaced over a calendar year. So aside from just that, the switch to an absolute TN load, we did look at some alternatives. We looked at essentially 3 alternatives. The first 2 are up here. All 3 were some form of manipulation of either the TMDL or the hydrologic reference period. The bottom line was that all three of the alternatives did not resolve the disconnect between hydrologic loads and total loads. This is the third alternative, which was essentially using a buffer and or a safety margin, and this was even worse. It actually resulted in more frequent non-attainment of the TMDL. So again, I'm not going to go into these alternatives too much. These are in Appendix B of the report. So that's where some of the causality analysis that supports these data are presented.
Brandon, what was the second alternative considered? I didn't catch that.
Let's see. Yeah, so that's going to be second alternative, looks at the existing TMDL and changes the reference period to 2005 to 2009. That was a period of relative stability in the Bay segment, and we had increasing seagrass growth. So that's why that time period was selected. Yep. Okay, these are new management targets. These are, as Ed mentioned, these are not addressing the regulatory thresholds, but are pertinent to management targets that we feel will contribute to a few factors that the estuary program is dealing with, but also contribute to the goals and thresholds for chlorophyll A and TN in the Bay segment. Let's see here. You can see we have that's the complementary chlorophyll A management target. It's a seasonal subsegment target. We looked at Lake Tarpon discharge as partially as an opportunistic target due to current feasibility studies and activities there, and then look at some oyster restoration goals. So chlorophyll A non-attainment and looking at that through the lens of the target and the threshold. What you can see is that the frequent non-attainment for chlorophyll A is focused in the Northwest and Central West subsegments. This is caused by the seasonally elevated concentrations during those summer months, June to October. And that leads us to, it indicates that those subsegments may be serving as hotspots and could be leading indicators of broader conditions throughout Old Tampa Bay in general. So in developing the targets for those subsegments, we looked at the possibility of attaining that chlorophyll A depending on what you did in those subsegments. We looked at least a 75% probability that the current annual target of 8.5 would be attained for that's for the chlorophyll target. And it's kind of hard to see with those dotted lines. If you look at the subsegments only, the Northwest and Central West subsegment, that 75% probability corresponds to 11.3 and 13.8 micrograms per liter in those subsegments. And those essentially, if you're maintaining those levels in those subsegments, based on the empirical data that we looked at, it's indicating at least a 75% probability that you will be attaining the Bay segment wide, Old Tampa Bay segment wide chlorophyll target throughout that segment. Along with this, we looked at the opportunity for adaptive management to address not just chlorophyll, but the pyridinium response to these reductions in chlorophyll in those subsegments. So this was a graphic, another way to kind of visualize that, that Marcus helped us put together. There's two sides, the A side and the B side are the target, the management target and the regulatory threshold. And then each column there, what you can think of is the column on the left is the actual data that was loading data from those years and the corresponding stoplight assessment of whether or not either the target or the threshold was attained. So real data on the left. The right side column in each of those is kind of a hindsight prediction of had we met those those seasonal subsegment targets in the Northwest and Central West subsegments, what would the outcome be in Old Tampa Bay as a whole? And you can see that if you meet those subsegment targets, for example, that threshold is met in those 3 years. And actually the four of the last, I guess, 8 years up there throughout Old Tampa Bay. Is there anything else on that, Marcus, or is that?
No, that's pretty much it. So as Brandon said, so you have the A and the B. The A is the management targets. This is our traditional stoplight graphic we use and convey to our TAC and our policy board. And then the B is the regulatory yes, no, is that threshold for Old Tampa Bay. And the right columns in each is essentially if those new sub-segment targets that are seasonal were met, what the outcomes would have looked like. And the whole reason why we're doing this project is those 3 consecutive red years in the B column on the left. And so you'll see that if we had met those new proposed targets in that time of year for those locations, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it's more just proof in the pudding that these are appropriate for what we're trying to do and attain the chlorophyll targets as well as thresholds for this project.
Just one other thing to point out, the instances where it's still yellow or red on the right column is also an indicator for the estuary program that pyridinium might not be the issue in that case. Might be blooms occurring outside of those seasonal and subsegment levels that we kept in terms of that right side assessment. So again, it's kind of additional information for us to look at other portions of the year where new issues might be presenting themselves and creating chlorophyte conditions not conducive for seagrass recovery.
I just wanted to clarify that it's not pyridinium isn't going to be responding to the target, but this gives us a better idea of where we can target management activities in a sub-basin that's draining to a portion of Old Tampa Bay or a particular time of year where we can ramp up our nitrogen load control activities. So this makes it so that we don't have to think about everything all the time. We can focus in on these priority areas because that's what's driving non-attainment right now.
Thank you all. So this led to exploration of opportunities of inputs. And this was our third recommendation that came out of this task. And that's looking at Lake Tarpon outfall canal discharge. You can see the graph up there that shows the nitrogen loading from Lake Tarpon outfall canal. And you can see it's highly variable annually, driven by pulses essentially related to those wet season pulses. And then this graphic here, you can see that this is the pyridinium counts from, I believe it's 2012 to 2013 is the data set that we had available. So we recognize that there's a trade-off between flow from Lake Tarpon that may drive some circulation and delivery of nitrogen. So we tried to look at the response from outfall discharge and the corresponding empirical data for pyridinium counts. And we've kind of found a sweet spot from about 4 to 40 CFL or CFS that shows that may be beneficial balance between that nitrogen delivery from those waters and the volume of water that's coming out of there. Again, the topic of this Lake Tarpon Outfall Canal is opportunistic. As many of you know, there's some feasibility studies going on exploring opportunities to reuse water from Lake Tarpon. And so the estuary program and we felt it was appropriate to explore what those effects might be, especially when you're looking at those subsegments of the Northwest and Central West, perhaps acting as hotspots for Old Tampa Bay segment. Our fourth recommendation, again, this has broader implications to some of the other management goals that the estuary program is looking at. But we wanted to see what, if anything, some oyster restoration could do for this area. The estuary program has developed habitat restoration goals, and we looked at those are bay-wide goals. Now there's also been some habitat potential, some habitat indices done to look at potential habitats for restoration. So we took some of that data and looked at what is carved out for Old Tampa Bay. The goal we developed here was 175 acres of oysters to be restored by 2050. That's in line with the estuary program's overall habitat restoration goals for oysters in the bay. And looking at some of the published data on filtration rates, the graph on the left there kind of shows what you would be potential for filtering rates if you were able to meet that 175 acres in the bay segment. Certainly, we recognize that every particle of water does not get filtered through an oyster there. It's an equivalent volume. So don't take that graph and that vertical axis title too seriously. But we looked at a reduction in possible reduction in chlorophyll A concentrations at that 175 acre goal, perhaps contributing, how that would contribute to attainment of the chlorophyll A targets in the bay segment. Just for reference, that habitat indices indicates there's up to 2,500 acres of highly restorable or high potential oyster habitat in Old Tampa Bay. And I don't have the exact acreage now, but a lot of that high potential habitat does exist in those Northwest and Central West subsegments. So to recap, our recommendations from this task are to attain the current TMDL in absolute terms. One of the reasons we looked at that and that what that indicates is that the TMDL that was developed in the 1990s appears to be valid. It's the fact that it hasn't been attained or has been obscured a little bit due to the hydrologic normalization process is something that may be leading to non-attainment of some of those other goals like chlorophyll. Establish the complementary management target for chlorophyll A with, again, that's a seasonal subsegment target for that Northwest and Central West subsegments. Reduce the discharge volumes from Lake Tarpon outfall to less than 40 CFS. Again, that's a balance of that beneficial flushing with the nitrogen that comes in from those discharges. And then increase the total acreage of oyster beds in Old Tampa Bay to 175 acres. Again, this could have implications on chlorophyll A concentrations, but possible interactions and reductions in pyridinium blooms through just the increased filtering. So looking ahead for task 3, we're going to take a look at the management interventions going on currently, how those what impacts those would have under the proposed targets, how those will be developed. And one of the things we're looking at there is using a CHASM model, which is a comprehensive aquatic systems model, to help flesh out some of those, the results of those interventions, and the looking at the complexities of that ecological model in the bay, and how those reactions, along with some of the other variables such as temperature, salinity, may come into play. I think that is it. So I think the idea here was to hopefully spark some discussion and some questions. So we'll open it up to the floor. Thank you.
Abe has a question. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Yeah, so I like this approach. I think this is a really good start. There's a couple of things though that I wanted to just kind of maybe talk about or bring to everyone's attention. At the beginning of this slide deck, it sounds like we're holding with our current paradigm, which basically says that clarity is driving seagrass. Are we sure that we're comfortable saying that? Because I'm not. I think there's other things going on than just the typical nitrogen chlorophyll light paradigm in Old Tampa Bay. And maybe you have data to support that, but I didn't see anything in this presentation to support that conclusion. Now, on the other side of that, I think what you're talking about with absolute load is spot on. And I'm very glad that we got to that point. And I think looking at chlorophyll is really good. Where I think we want to be careful is not to make that leap that if we attain these chlorophyll targets, then seagrass will recover. I think there's too much other stuff going on to make that connection. And so I think it's okay in the sense that we're looking at really managing that chlorophyll target. That to me makes sense because there is evidence to show that connectivity with pyridinium and other phytoplankton blooms in Old Tampa Bay. I just would be cautious not to go too far and say that if we do this, then we will see seagrass return. I just don't think there's enough evidence to support that. That's one thing. Another thing is too, with respect to that light environment, Old Tampa Bay, especially during blooms, is driven highly by CDOM. You can see that, dark water comes in during the rainy season. So I'm not sure that are you accounting for light attenuation due to color dissolved organic matter and potentially other sources of light loss. And then the last thing was regarding the Lake Tarpon recommendation. I think it's a great conversation point, and we need to have this conversation, but just so the group understands, we are very limited to what we can and cannot do with discharge from Lake Tarpon. I think looking at other options for that water is great. Perhaps we need to look in Brooker Creek because that's where most of the flow comes into Lake Tarpon. But while it could be a good recommendation to say 40 CFS, it's unrealistic to expect that we would be able to do that because the primary function of that structure is to maintain water levels in Lake Tarpon, and we are bound by the Army Corps schedule on what we can and cannot do. So I think that could be a good talking point. And I think it's actually very timely because we're working with the Corps right now to potentially look at redesigning S551. So this might be really a good time to start having that conversation. But just understand that you can propose less than 40 CFS. that's probably not going to happen with the way things are operating at this point in time. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Chris, I think we agree with you completely about seagrass necessarily responding to the attaining these new chlorophyll A targets. I think our perspective is basically working through the problem in a stepwise fashion. And so if we attain it, how does seagrass respond? If seagrass doesn't respond, then we know we need to do these other things that are related to sort of macroalgae pathways and temperature and some of the other sensitivities that we've identified. And frankly, we're data limited on, and so that's why we've sort of bracketed for the purpose of this project. But so then it's basically like a real life science experiment, right?
Yeah, and I totally agree. I just want to caution that we don't lay that expectation because quite frankly, I mean, from my opinion, if we can reduce the chlorophyll concentration and we don't see an increase in seagrass coverage for some other reason, I still think that's a win. I mean, we're lowering chlorophyll concentrations, and that's a good thing in Old Tampa Bay, whether seagrass come back or not. And I just want to make sure that's not lost. Like, I think that's a great goal to have, irrespective of seagrass. Obviously, that's our ultimate goal, but as you just pointed out, there are maybe other things going on. So just that was just wanted to put that out there.
Point totally taken and appreciated. And I think, sort of for the purposes of the consortium, I hope you guys are hearing that, there's really only one recommendation right now that's really relevant, to you all as we need to make a decision about, and that's this idea of abandoning the hydrologic normalization. These complementary targets, which we're considering, are going to need to go before our technical advisory committee, and some of them, like the Lake Tarpon outfall canal in particular, is, I view it as a way when we know that these big decisions are being made by Tampa Bay Water as they're developing alternative water supplies, or by the district and the Army Corps as they're evaluating their structures. If these are lines of evidence that they could use in making those decisions, then that's great. I don't know that we're at a place where we've gathered enough evidence to adopt those as a new management target for the estuary program and the technical advisory committee, but it's sort of advancing that conversation and trying to contribute to these opportunistic shots we've got at some of like the big things that are going on and influencing conditions in Old Tampa Bay. But heard that the outfall canal has specific intended uses that are outlined in an Army Corps manual, and we're not going to be overwriting that. I think we understand.
And Chris, just to on your seagrass point, as Maya said, that's we said, yeah, we're not changing anything with the seagrass target here. We still think that the current segment target of 11,800 acres is hopefully still valid. We didn't have enough evidence to change that seagrass goal. As Maya said, a stepwise approach of meeting that absolute load at the TMDL, at the existing TMDL level. How does that respond? And then, stepwise through after that. So just wanted to kind of show why that was, seagrass light attenuation. Those were not, we didn't recommend change there because we do recognize the complexities in that relationship and the role that other factors can play in that.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I just would caution and maybe think about a caveat to the new paradigm or new proposed framework that while light attenuation and seagrass are still targets, and I agree, I don't think, we should change those, but we may want to just put the caveat that there are enough uncertainty that if we meet the chlorophyll TMDL and we're successful in that, then I almost think that in and of itself is a success. So I guess I don't, those last two on this table are such an uncertainty that I would hate to tie our success or failure based on two indicators that may or may not have a direct relationship with nitrogen loading and chlorophyll concentration. So that's the only thing I'm just saying. It's maybe more of a nuanced thing, but I'm happy, I'm comfortable with chlorophyll being kind of the target that we're trying to attain. And if we attain it, then I think we can say that we've succeeded. Now, if there's evidence to support later on that maybe it is a light limitation and we need chlorophyll concentrations to go even lower, then we can address that later. But I just see so much uncertainty with seagrass in Old Tampa Bay that I would hate to have that be the metric and everyone go, oh, well, look, we failed because we didn't get our seagrass back to that 11,800 acres. That's all.
I mean, that's possible, but I think the best evidence that we have right now is showing that it's not a light limitation issue, that it might be one of these other
Right.
stressors that we've kind of discussed.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. I just want to make sure that we mention that in the final report so that, you know, we're explicit in saying that. What you just said is perfect.
Yes.
I think it's, like has been stated, it's a baby step approach. You know, of interest is of course the light environment and seagrass, but also the pyridinium conditions that we've been observing for the past decade plus in Old Tampa Bay. So the expression of these new total nitrogen thresholds as an absolute load is hopefully trying to address both of those things. But if we see evidence after we're actually meet that absolute load threshold recommendation and we're controlling pyridinium, but we're still failing in seagrass, that indicates, you know, other management interventions need to be explored at that point. It might not be the nitrogen load lever that we need to, you know, be pulling to address seagrass losses in Old Tampa Bay.
It's a baby step and it's back to basics, but it's not insignificant. And we would really like to hear sort of your pulse of how, like, what you think about this, because it's not going to be easy. Yeah.
I'll weigh in a little bit. There's no codified TMDL. Everything that is codified is essentially in the final orders, which 486 is identified. If you eliminate the normalization, which I'm not commenting one way or another, I wasn't real thrilled about it to begin with, just so everybody knows, you will immediately put all of the stormwater entities out of compliance. Those water plants aren't normalized, so they will remain solvent in the absence of a reallocation. They remain solvent. Every one of our MS4s go out of compliance. You have to open up the overarching final order, the one that addresses all 4 bay segments, and would have to remove the normalization specific to Old Tampa Bay or whatever. If you're going to do it in multiple bay segments, you would have to do it through that final order and then get that signed by the secretary, basically. And then you would have to make a consideration of whether you're going to reallocate within the individual final order for Old Tampa Bay.
Yeah, these are sort of the questions and discussions we need to have with the consortium, because we are not changing the total TMDL load that was the basis for developing allocations to individual entities within the bay segment. But certainly compliance, as Jeff stated, is going to be more problematic for those that are hydrologically effective in terms of their loading conditions each year.
If you don't go in and change the normalization criteria in that overarching final order for Old Tampa Bay, there's no way to compel anybody to meet the hard number of 486.
Yeah, right now, the numeric nutrient criteria, the way it's expressed for Old Tampa Bay is basically a normalized load of 1.08 tons per total nitrogen per million cubic meter of water entering the bay segment. When you do the math on sort of the 1992 to 1994 hydrological conditions, you get 486 tons. But I think some of the graphics that are shown, you know, we're not at those hydrologic conditions any longer in that bay segment. We're way above that most years.
Yeah.
So the way we actually express compliance and assess compliance relative to, particularly in the MS4 or non-point source load allocation within that bay segment, is probably it's going to be problematic, and we kind of have to work through that. We still don't really have a good indication of, if we propose an absolute load to DEP, how that would be expressed as a numeric nutrient criteria either. because all the dependency in the state of Florida are expressed either as a chlorophyll or total nitrogen concentration. So we kind of need to resolve that over the next several months and present that in the addendum package. If the consortium feels we need to move forward with an absolute load recommendation as our new regulatory threshold, kind of have to work through what that compliance assessment framework would be for the whole Tampa Bay segment. Because it's not going to be the same as it was in the past with the adjustment relative to 1992-94 hydrologic condition. The alternatives that the contractor kind of explored, we're kind of working towards a new expression of the hydrologic conditions that are now represented in the Bay segment, more current contemporary period. But still, even when you made those adjustments on the Bay segment level, it didn't make sense or jive with meeting the chlorophyll A target. That's why we don't have an easy answer right now in terms of what that means, in terms of an individual entity meeting its load allocation relative to what has already been adopted by funnel or to DEP. But that is something that's going to follow in task 3 and 4 of this project. The most immediate next step is really looking at projects that are being implemented right now by all the partners, what is planned to be implemented over the next 10 years. And if we could use either empirical or mechanistic evidence to suggest that with those interventions, we will be more in compliance with an absolute load, that's hopefully additional assurance to the consortium members that, this baby step approach is leading us in the right direction as long as those interventions are implemented. But if there's still a disconnect, we kind of have to have that conversation with the consortium. What do we do to get that base segment back on track? If it's not a nitrogen load management scenario, maybe it's more oysters, maybe it's looking at discharges other than Lake Carbon outflow as additional management interventions that will get us back on track and meeting those chlorophyll conditions, hopefully recovering seagrass. So we knew going into this project that there's no easy answer for this base segment. There's probably going to be pain. We just need to kind of work through that pain and make sure that at the end of the day, when we deliver it to DEP, that there's comfort within the consortium that these are aggressive enough things to get the base segment back on track, but they're manageable and that we can attain them probably within the next 10, 15 years.
And we're committed to acting on that.
I think the last sort of component of that is if we move away from normalization in the space segment, we'll follow it. We're going to put people out of compliance. The department will have to have some kind of corrective action in play to actually re-sign the document. You can't sign the document and have everybody out of compliance, or historically, rephrase, they would never have signed something that there wasn't reasonable assurance for, and that's what the document was all about to begin with. When it was drafted, was that we provided reasonable assurance that we would meet attainment. That's clearly been problematic for the space segment over the last almost 20 years now, right? 2007, or whenever we signed it.
Yeah, I think when we came back to sort of arriving at, if we met that loading target that was developed back in 1990s, what's old is potentially new again. We came up with loading reduction per year estimates that were going to be needed by the community to help meet that absolute load limit over a 5-10 year basis. So we might have to revisit something like that if the department was to adopt an absolute load. We'd have to say that there's commitments to reduce loads and do these other interventions, and that would be how we get the base segment back on track.
I would just be prepared for that. I think that's inevitable.
Well, that's part of the next task, because it's not just the modeling effort, but it's also to see like, what are you already planning to do? Or what are things that are possible that you could commit to if we showed that you needed to do that in order to attain the loading that's required now.
Which I'll put in a plug for our task 3 that is dependent on that information from the entities. So I think you have a database that or a route for folks to provide that, but encourage everyone to get their projects.
Yeah, I think certainly the biggest ask is in terms of compliance of Senate Bill 64, the Clean Waterways Act, the management plans for each of the facilities that are currently discharging into whole Tampa Bay segment. If we can understand what those plans are for those facilities, that will help us kind of factor in those plans over the next 10 years and whether or not that's going to be enough to potentially put us back in compliance and attainment of both the loading target and the chlorophyll target. And then from there, we could work out what additional interventions above and beyond what might be provided by the consortium participants that are planned for over the next 10 years is going to be needed. And that will give us a better picture of the information that DEP is probably going to be looking for to understand whether or not these targets are attainable, and if we're automatically out of compliance with these recommendations, how we're going to be back in compliance.
So we're asking you to update the action plan database and or email Sherry Hilster with your Senate Bill 64 plans that were approved by DEP or accepted by DEP, or any other nitrogen load reduction projects that you have in the works by November 20th, so that we can keep that task 3 on track. We're also asking that you all provide comments on the draft task 2 report that Brandon's presented on today by next week, November 6th. And then essentially our course of action is in November, we would like to come back with a decision memo. That's basically that opportunity for everyone to say, yes, we're on board with this first recommendation about absolute nitrogen load, or no, we need to do something else and this is what we prefer. You guys need to be able to tell us that. And then we can start working out, sort of how that gets integrated into an RA addendum, and we sort of figure out those pragmatic steps with the regulatory bodies after that. But we sort of want to make sure we get explicit concurrence from you along the way. So this is your second introduction to sort of the results of this first round of analyses. If there's additional information that you need that would give you greater confidence in making a decision, please let us know. Like this is the time we kind of need to know where everybody's at or what they need still in order to make a go, no go kind of call.
I have a question. Is there information on those MS4s that we absolutely would exceed? Do we know by how much, or is that a way that we can look at that?
Yeah, that information is available. It's going to be based on we can look at both the absolute load and the hydrological conditions.
And then they can provide what their loading was.
I think we started some of that, but we try not to present it, to everybody else.
Yeah.
We try and, do one-on-one. So if a one-on-one is what helps you make this decision, contact Ed or myself and we can.
Yeah, I'm very interested in seeing, because, the other
Yeah.
discussion that we were having was the allocation itself. So having that information would be helpful.
There's not a lot of MS4, right? Nels is a singular. Largo has a separate one. Same G though, but they're not part, they're not part of the area. Problematic. You have the one. We have one. Tampa has one.
So it looks like that may be information that would be. Another question that I had is, are we looking then to protect, because I kept hearing only for all Tampa Bay or for all segments? If we go to do this to all segments, do they have any kind of impact? The same as all Tampa Bay of people probably exceeding, or you don't see that?
So since we're meeting the chlorophyll conditions and all the other base segments, this is only relevant to Old Tampa Bay. The recommendations are only relevant to Old Tampa Bay. The complication, as Jeff suggests, is that the base segments and the normalization are grouped together in a final order. So
exactly. So that's where either EPA or DEP may push back and say, well, since you have it all together, you should make the changes. That's what I was like.
There's not anything to suggest that we need to make those changes in the base segment, right?
If the change were to be made, would that have meeting the TMDL and the other segments, would that be an issue or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can guarantee it. No way we're meeting stormwater loads associated with the original EMDL. I just can't imagine. I'd be shocked. Maybe Hillsborough Bay.
Yeah, lower Tampa Bay has a minimal, like MS4 presence. But
I can't.
yeah, the hydrologic conditions have changed throughout the watershed, for sure. And again, we're not suggesting that this absolute load recommendation is appropriate for those other basics, because the chloroflake conditions are largely met. And really, the largest losses in seagrasses have been in the whole Tampa Bay segment, a little bit in Hillsborough Bay, but you know, the maximum seagrass exceeding Hillsborough Bay is fairly low compared to the rest of them.
Basically, we all know, but we'll say it just for the purposes of discussion here, that Old Tampa Bay is built as 3 semi-confined vitrifying basins, basically associated with what we did with the land bridges, all the way down to the end, y'all. Come on. No mystery why the west side over there is problematic in the center and the northern portions. I mean, come on.
Chris A is trying to speak again. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey guys, no, I didn't mean to interrupt the thought process. I just had kind of a parting thought relative to the point source discharge. I don't remember seeing that as one of the proposed actions, and I don't know. I know, Ed, you were talking about Senate Bill 64, but you know, I went back to some of the work that was done during the integrated modeling work back several years ago, and you know, one of that was recognized, that and the Lake Tarpon discharge were the 2 management actions that really could provide the greatest benefit with the relatively, you know, smallest cost. And I'm just wondering if that's still going to factor into some of the, when we get to the management actions. Seems like the point source reduction and Lake Tarpon are the 2 actions that, you know, we already determined were the ones that could have the best net environmental benefit relative to cost. Is that going to factor into this as well, this work?
Yes, we'd like it to, you know, the other big factor was a potential 25% reduction in non-point source loads throughout that base segment.
Okay.
We're currently embarking on a restore grant project to identify those additional non-point source load reduction projects that would help achieve that 25% reduction. So
That's non-point source though.
correct.
So
Yeah.
all of those things were basically, you know, those projects were identified, but then not really acted upon.
Right.
For 10 years. And so now Senate Bill 64 kind of forces action on the point sources. And we're proposing, considering something with Lake Tarpon, but given all of those constraints, you know, we're not sure what is really feasible there. And then we also think that, but that's what task 3 is going to be about, is that there's additional non-point sources, source reductions that will need to occur. And so we're trying to sort of lay out that path. And
Senate Bill 64 provides plenty of off ramps to not eliminate your discharge. It's not the alpha elimination bill that you guys thought you think it is.
That's why we want to know. Plans.
But even so, like ours wouldn't, if we showed, when we showed you ours, but when we show you our more recent one that we submit tomorrow or whenever, it suggests that we will maintain an outfall, but that's not what our operational status will really look like. We will largely cease discharge. And when that happens, then I will likely recommend giving our load to Mr. Glickscard back there, because he's gonna have a problem meeting that number for task 4. I mean, it's not like it's just going away. It's just, we're just gonna paper transfer over to David there and his group. So I don't think I'm.
Jeff, that's a great point. I mean, that's kind of why I brought it up, because it's not a foregone conclusion that, you know, okay, that's just, those point sources are going to disappear. So I just want to make sure that rate's pretty high as far as management actions as well, because it isn't a foregone conclusion. You're correct.
And quite honestly, like some of the off ramps provided in that statute 43064 are very nebulous. I mean, is Clearwater here?
Yeah, it doesn't give any kinds of quantities of what you gotta do.
That's correct. There's no quantity. So
They do 1 million gallons of indirect potable reuse to they can continue to discharge.
They could potentially continue to discharge as is. There's no quantities in it, guys. It's very loose and fast. I'm sorry.
That's what.
I'm just,
Yeah, I think that's why Ilya's point is important, because if we understand, especially when an entity has point source and non-point source allocation, you can see where the freeboard could be achieved if you're implementing Senate Bill 64 to its max, and you create some freeboard for your non-point source allocation within your entity.
and I know
And
you
that,
guys.
that
know
might be
that.
enough to keep an entity in compliance. It still is, you know, we still have to grapple with the absolute load in most years is exceeded. And there has to be reduction somewhere across, you know, all sources to meet a 486 absolute load target. And that's gonna be difficult. It's not gonna be easy.
I mean, is Ridgeway even discharging anymore? I know they were, but they sort of did their water recycle thing and almost brought it to a halt. And you are the only other industry, I think, in that Bay segment.
Yeah, we're just
You're
the one,
tiny.
we just discharged one time.
After the repowering, they're nothing. Significant air reduction from them too, by the repowering. And I know you guys know. That's what it's.
No, we all need to
I
talk
just
about
want
it.
everybody to sort of hear. What I see is some potential stumbling blocks for us that, and not to think too much along the point sources in particular, because that statute really is full of holes as far as actually eliminating discharges. And then on top of that, most of us have a strong connection. Most of us point source dischargers have a strong connection with our MS4 group, and we're going to be given our load in the absence of reallocating the 486 times.
Yeah, right now, we're not proposing reallocating.
Right.
So.
And then, you know, my engineering background tells me it never fixes the problem of the fact that we've got hydraulic resonance times in half a year plus when you get up into northwest Old Tampa Bay. You got water sitting up there for 6 months. And that allows the nitrogen, our nitrogen, most of the point source discharges are making 100% organic nitrogen. That allows those guys to go through a full cycle easily, multiple cycles.
But the hard thing is, like, this group, what is it that we control? You know, we've all kind of made the case, and I think that everybody's bought in the room, that the causeways are exacerbating water quality challenges in this Bay segment. We don't control those decisions. What we can do is show that if we're still out of compliance, we're gonna do the best that we can. We're gonna come up with these load reductions, and we can report on how the Bay responds. If the Bay that Bay segment continues to not respond, that helps us make our case and pop it back in the, into the sphere, the venue where somebody else who does control that, has to do something. Because right now, you guys are the ones that are on the hook. You may or may not control all of the levers that are actually influencing things. So I think to be good faith actors, we have to do our part of stepping up more and seeing how it responds. And, if it doesn't respond all the way, then it's really clear what other actors are gonna need to step up. I don't see it any other way, because we've tried, we've made these cases, we'll continue to try and make those cases, but we gotta kind of up the ante. David.
So don't disagree, obviously something needs to change and we need to do more. I do have discomfort with making a recommendation to DEP that's going to put many of our MS4 permittees out of compliance. And I know that we need to do more in terms of load reduction. And so I guess one of my questions, you mentioned the stormwater load reduction project that the SRA program is looking at implementing now. And that's coming up at the next management and policy board meetings. And so in terms of timing of all of this, I guess I'm not quite sure how all that works, because should we be looking at what projects are in the works now, what projects may be coming out of the recommendations of that project in the next 2 to 3 years. To see what kind of, real potential load reductions can be achieved additionally. For changing up, how the compliance part of it works.
Yeah, my staff knows well enough that my timelines are usually unrealistic, so I was hoping to have that Old Tampa Bay stormwater project already like due a year by now. We just got the contract from the granting agency in October, basically. So certainly that is going to be additional information that we would want to integrate into the reasonable assurance update at the 2027 time period. I'm hoping that some information can still be integrated in the addendum if we choose to go this route of some of the recommendations that were proposed today, but we're not going to have absolute answers of what projects they are. The whole outcome of that work will be basically a menu of projects that are trying to achieve additional entry load reductions that would get us up to about a 25% or 90 ton per year load reduction in the Tampa Bay segment. So anywhere from probably about 10 to 20 projects. We're only going to be able to implement 1 to 2 to 3 projects ultimately. So additional implementation dollars would need to come to see probably the full suite of those projects implemented over the next 5 to 10 years. So that's where I say I think that could be folded into the reasonable assurance update, but the details of the specific projects aren't going to probably be identified in time for the addendum. So I know that will probably cause discomfort for some of the MS4 entities in the room. Without having that information, kind of we're asking whether or not there's comfort or consensus to move toward this absolute load recommendation. But I think, and I hope that we still have the trust of the consortium that we're going to move through this in a pragmatic fashion and ultimately not propose something that we don't think is achievable in the long run. It's a measure of how painful that achieving it might be in terms of cost and pain to individual entities. And as much as we could detail sort of those scenarios, each individual entity will do that over the next several months. But we're not going to be able to guarantee like 100% assurance that your entity is not going to be out of compliance. We would recommend an absolute low limit at this time. There's going to be pain somewhere in the base segment because we're exceeding that absolutely most years. It's more of a question to me of what we are proposing to implement now and into the future, if that's going to be enough to bring us back into compliance. That's where task 3 and ultimately developing the addendum comes into the next several steps of this contract. And I don't think we're going to get there by the end of the calendar year. That was my aggressive timeline that I was looking for. It's probably going to be into early part of 2025 where we get that sense of comfort how to move forward in the space segment collectively.
And we're all ears. If you've got a different path, if you don't like ours, we're all in this together. And so if there's something that we've missed that we haven't evaluated fairly or that we haven't thought of.
Preface this by saying my organization doesn't necessarily have direct skin in the game as it relates to Old Tampa Bay, but I would have a really hard time going to my leadership and saying, hey, I'm going to sign us up to be out of compliance with no guarantee that we have what we need in the pipeline project wise to provide reasonable assurance back to the department that we're going to come back into compliance within an acceptable time frame. So I feel like for anybody that's affected, we're asking them to consider this absolute load approach for compliance assessment purposes. We need to open a dialogue with DEP to even understand if they're open to the concept of, these Senate bill projects, if there are commitments that are being made, and I believe there are, that they will accept that. And so there's a grace period for us to kind of allow these entities to execute on that work. You know, I don't see how we can ask people to sign up to be perpetually out of compliance. And make that decision today or in the very near future without understanding, you know, DEP's perspective.
Yeah, and I think the evidence that we'll hopefully build in task 3 of the existing intervention with the plan will hopefully provide some comfort in order to come to some consensus agreement on how to move forward in that base segment, but it's not gonna be absolute, it's not gonna be 100% assurance. And whether or not that's enough for the department to move forward with the decision from the consortium, you know, we're walking this path together. And we're not pushing any decision on the consortium if there's not comfort level to bring that decision to bear for the consortium to consider.
Well, and if you think about it right now, right, we've got the hydrologic normalization, so that puts you in a better place in terms of entities being in compliance. But we are more likely to have chlorophyll out of compliance. So we've got a problem, but then we come back. So you might be out of compliance more often with your load allocation. But if we're seeing improvements, and this is hypothetical, so fair enough, but we could see more compliance with chlorophyll A, so we're not then delving back into individual entity compliance regularly because we're going in the right direction. And that was sort of the original spirit, right? So because we're not proposing something new, we're proposing to hold the line on a nitrogen load and to implement, you know, a certain load reduction each year incrementally along the way, so that we're sort of moving that trend line in the right direction, and then hoping we see requisite improvements in conditions and the expression in the bay itself. If we see that, then I think from a compliance perspective, it's basically just sort of like flipping which one is more likely to be out of compliance, but the outcome might actually be better. But
So I agree with that, but I think that
I agree.
ignores the fact that
I agree.
entities have permit limits.
yeah, I hear you.
They are responsible for,
Yeah.
and that broader, hey, we didn't meet that number.
Yeah.
But overall, we're seeing chlorophyll A improved in the base segment, so give us a pass.
Yeah.
I'm not sure every entity would get that.
Non-compliance
That
affects our
pass.
bond rating,
Right.
bottom line.
That's, yeah.
Then we can't build stuff, then we can't do these projects, but we can't have the same bond rating. It's connected heavily to that.
Once these allocations were built into permits, that added a layer of complication, as Jeff said. Financing piece and, yeah, Jeff, I think you stepped out of the room, but I think my point was, we really need to open a dialogue with DEP. Because I would be, if I were in the shoes of an entity in Old Tampa Bay with a discharge and allocation, I would find it really hard to go to my management team and say, hey, sign up for non-compliance without really understanding what the off-ramp is, or if they're even in one, right? So that's something I think after task 3 maybe can happen, and we understand what the projects would ultimately be predicted to achieve in terms of load reductions and how that relates to using absolute load as a compliance evaluation threshold.
Is the purpose of changing it from normalized to absolute to strongly encourage then those projects to, you know, to encourage that reduction where it hasn't happened? Is that, can we achieve that without making the change? If there's a commitment from those entities?
Hello. Because that's more or less kind of my takeaway. Like, I thought about this again when you started the meeting, Tino. It's like we got a taste of what back-to-back wet season years look like in 2015 through 2017 with Hermine and sanitary sewer overflows. And we didn't really change our actions, right? And so we saw how the Bay responds. Okay, so we had a couple dry years, we had things good, we only strung together a couple, and now we're looking at it again. Are we going to keep letting it go? Because we know how the Bay is gonna respond, we have a good idea, right? So that's a great question, that's another path. How committed are we to doing it on the voluntary kind of basis, which is honestly where this thing started.
Yeah.
What sense do we have from the department of what they're gonna do about us exceeding the limit? That's not specifically tied to any one of these entities. That's tied to the reasonable assurance document. Right. So you have this weird, not a conflict with this weird paradigm where you have these entities all in compliance and you're still not attaining in this one basic. Maybe you don't have, maybe everybody isn't in compliance, but I'm just assuming that we're close to being in compliance. We're not.
Yeah, we can look at that. I was just thinking like that is another target, not a not a threshold, but a target. We could go back to like how many like 70 loads, 70 tons or, 20 tons per year. We could have that as a target that's not reported.
Well, when you see Lake Tarpon, on the graph, a couple of those years, they were over 100 tons.
Yeah.
That's more than 20% of the overall load for the whole bay segment. You're 20% of the 486 and 97. I mean, how much has that increased? Seems like a lot. Maybe I'm just trying to blame Lake Tarpon. But
No, I mean, the numbers
maybe
are
we
the
can
numbers.
open up the sinkhole and send it back out.
Not coffee pot.
Whatever body who goes out there, something like that. And let's go out.
Yeah, there's certainly additional assessments that we're gonna need to do and present to the consortium. Sounds like before y'all will feel comfortable in terms of the recommendation. I think there could be a path though with developing a load reduction management target that's outside of the regulatory threshold arena. Still, if we do recommend an absolute load at the base segment level, still going to funnel down to the entity level in some way for our compliance with the boilerplate condition under the traditional framework that we've developed. So I think we need to kind of take a look at the contemporary hydrologic conditions and still factor that into compliance assessment in some way. But put us on a path where the absolute load target might be achievable in 10, 15 years. That's the only thing I could sort of rationalize in my mind, that I don't know if that's going to provide enough assurance to concerning that at that point, or the department of proposing something that we're going to be automatically out of compliance with.
I'm also kind of just curious, like how much this is surprising to you, because I feel like we've tried to convey that this disconnect is there for a while, and now that there's like a regulatory framework, that's what you guys are paying attention to. From my perspective, it shouldn't be news that there's a disconnect and you're not in compliance with an absolute load. And I don't know if you guys all understood that or not, or if that does feel like news. And if you did know it, what's driving the case that you're making back to leadership to make these investments? How do we thread that needle? Because if we don't touch the stuff that's painful, and I understand that it's painful, if there's then no counter incentive to act, I do think there's these other places where we also need to make progress, but I don't think that this group can say like, we've done everything, we've done it all. And we're like, I think there's still work to be done on the load reduction side too. So I'm curious, what information you need and what drives the decision in a compelling way, and how can we help present that in a way that protects you, but also gives the poke that's needed maybe.
Well, I think from a private entity perspective, if the value in the investment is there, it's gonna get made, right? So, my leadership will never say no to project proposal that has some reasonable, chance of success, right? And is it the right lever, right?
Yeah.
Am I pulling a lever that's gonna contribute to the solution, or do we just not know? It might not, I don't know that would be much different for a public entity when they go and hat in hand and ask for funding for a project. They're gonna wanna know that those public dollars are gonna get an outcome, right? Otherwise, they're open to criticism from their constituents of, why'd you spend the money on that? That didn't do anything, right? And that's a really oversimplistic view of things, but I am concerned, and I appreciate Chris's comments about the Lake Tarpon situation and the relationship with the Corps, and their objectives are different than ours, right? They're flood control, right? But I mean, when Chris said, you know, we're bound to a certain schedule and there are limited options, when we have those discussions with the Corps, what are those? I would be really, really disappointed if all of these entities, and, you know, I pay taxes like everyone else in the room, spent all this money and burned all this energy on projects that didn't deliver a result, and there's Lake Tarpon just continuing to do what it does, right? I mean, all you have to do is look to South Florida and, you know, the Caloosahatchee and everything that's happened down there for the last 20 years to see that you can do a lot of good things in an estuary, and you don't get the load delivery right and the freshwater delivery right, it's not gonna make a difference. So I do have a lot of concerns that I don't think we should just set that aside as kind of like a sacred cow that can never be touched or, you know, discussed. So Jeff, I've heard you talk about it on and off for years now, the Lake Tarpon thing. I just want to make sure that, I don't want to bring up painful memories, but we had DOT in here, for example, with the work that's being done on 275, there was a slight window for an opportunity there to maybe, you know, do something with circulation patterns and things like that, and it didn't work out. But is there an opportunity, if SwiftMud is talking with the Corps right now about Lake Tarpon and their other projects, how can we be a more stronger advocate this time around to maybe do something there? I'm not saying that's the only thing we do, but.
Yeah, I agree. I think we all think it's a yes and it's those things that we don't have control of that we would like to see happen and we're not giving up on those things. But there's also load reductions that need to happen from players in this room too. Stacey?
And I don't know the status, but there is a ASR proposal for Lake Tarpon. So I don't know where that is, but you know, we can find that out. I don't know, Michelle, do you know what the
ASR?
Uh-huh.
Still in Tallahassee.
And the other is that Tampa Bay Water is evaluating another reservoir and taking surface water from Lake Tarpon and diverting it from the bypass canal to put it into a reservoir as the next alternative water supply. This is a ways out. It's all like it's an option. It hasn't been committed to, but we're trying to be in the conversation as early as we can.
Yeah, and then one question I don't know if maybe Stan Tech can look at. If we cut off or reduce the discharge from Lake Tarpon, how will that affect salinity and then your oyster population that you're hoping to grow in that region?
To answer your question, we haven't gotten that far down that rabbit hole, but you know, obviously there are connections, you know, ecological connections, not just with oysters, but with pyridinium, with seagrass, right? That that need to be investigated. Yeah, we're certainly cognizant as we move through with the estuary program on some of these recommendations. And likewise, there's the same trade-offs. You develop oyster habitat, you don't just increase your filtering, you have fisheries habitat, you have biomass, you have biodiversity components. So there's pluses and minuses with all of these interventions. But certainly that salinity, and I mean, my anecdotal answer would be it's the same, it's a trade-off, right? Same thing with beneficial flow and nitrogen delivery. You know, that flow is a freshwater flow. And so how does that affect salinity? You know, Marcus just had the hot and salty or fresh and salty.
Because it's getting fresher up in Old Tampa Bay, so.
Yeah, so there are, you know, not just inputs from that, but climactic responses as well, so.
I would expect that salinity would still be supportive of oysters up there, even with diversion that of the scale we're talking about, but that is something that hopefully the CASM model can evaluate during task 3.
Yeah, and some of the existing models that USF has, for example, answer that question in fairly short order. Because salinity is just trace of some of the existing techniques. Evaluate very well. For example, they looked at there's a graduate student in the Weisberg's lab that looked at what is the effect of basically diverting all of the flow from HF current as an example, how does that affect salinity? Not that that's a comparable scenario, but they have the capacity to do that. If that's an additional line of evidence that is needed to support these decisions, we could look at that.
In addition, there's a couple different angles you can look at in terms of the oyster recommendation, and there has been concerns in the past from both the TAC and I think some of the SMEs has also made the argument, oysters are animals. They're eating phytoplankton, they're gonna create ammonia and pseudofeces that are just recirculating nutrients in a slightly different way. They'd be assimilating some of those nutrients in tissues, but there is, that sort of dynamic and cycling that needs to be taken into consideration. If we did oysters, if we did nitrogen reductions, if we did a causeway alteration, if we did Lake Tarpon outfall canal, I think that's our most successful paths. That's what a lot of the modeling has suggested. It's not one silver bullet. It's all the things that we need to implement, and we got to make incremental progress towards each of those, I think, to get that basically back in a good ecological condition.
The expansion of the oyster areas, how would that be accomplished? Through grants, are there like projects that we would look at for that?
Yeah, we're trying to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of oyster restoration. There's not any projects proposed in Old Tampa Bay as it stands right now. There's some permitting that needs to be accomplished first. This is not an area of the bay where you can actually harvest shellfish. So we're doing restoration. It's going to oyster, restoration. It's strictly for restoration purposes. It's not going to create a fishery that would be open for harvest. And that disconnect might be difficult to permit, but we're wanting to work through those things. We came up with bay-wide oyster targets that have an intrinsic habitat value to the bay's ecosystem. I think what's being proposed is in line with that, but we also think there's likely some additional benefits in terms of lost iridanium cells that are going to be needed to quell those wounds in the future that oysters can help with. These other sort of nutrient cycling things are questions that some modeling exercise will hopefully also provide additional evidence why there's oyster restoration benefits in that bay segment. So as the case for most things in ecology, it's not going to be an easy answer to any question, but we're committed to building sort of evidence, the lines of evidence along the way of why we're putting forth the recommendations we're putting forth.
But I think what we could do is use our annual work plan appropriations from the estuary program to get, to permit priority areas. And then we could either use our funding or apply for external grants to implement restoration in those priority areas. We would also incentivize it through all of those things. And then we would see if any partners on a voluntary basis wanted to commit to those things, but it wouldn't be an obligation to the consortium. There's two things in the chat I just wanted to call people's attention to and see if maybe you can take a look at it after the fact. There is a graphic from the Old Tampa Bay study from 2015 that just kind of shows the change in salinity, the modeled change in salinity. If you do a 100% diversion from Lake Tarpon. And then Jonah, I don't know if you want to unmute and kind of say what you put in the text, or if you'd like me to read it.
Sure, I can say it myself. So it's just something I've heard, before in these conversations, something I've said before in these conversations that, I think it's just important to recognize that our consortium works best when we approach it from the perspective of how can we cooperatively reduce load rather than what can we get away with. So not excusing all of this, talk about improving, our inventory of sources and such, understanding the mechanisms going on in the bay, all that's critically important. But just, when we start to talk about allocations, if we all, divide and shelter, then we'd have no consortium. We're right back to where we were. So we have to think about how can we reduce load, not just what can we get away with and whose fault is it. That's all. Thanks.
Jonah.
Yeah, Maya, I added that. I put that in there. That slide I put in the chat came from a presentation from, I believe it was Holly and Ed, you guys. Well, I think Tony was the one that presented it. It was the Florida Stormwater Association meeting back in 2015. And I just threw that in there just to remind folks that might be new. And I know Maya, you and everyone at the SJ program knows this, but there's a lot of work that was done during that integrated model development. And so a lot of the questions I think that we're asking have already been answered. Maybe we update it with some more, current information, but there's a lot of stuff out there. And I think we keep pointing to the same issues. So I don't know, we need to study it anymore. I think we've got a lot of really good data to support what these management's actions should be.
Just to answer a question I think you asked, Maya, what would help us collectively would be maybe a table of loads by year by entity for the last 10 years. So folks can have a feel for how far off of that hard number they actually are. What are they really looking at? Are they looking at 20 tons or 5 tons or 1 ton? What is the real, crux of what they would like to do from a corrective action perspective? So you may have that already, but that's what I would look for if I was running.
Marcus developed something for the point sources, but I just not nudged him, say, oh, we need to do that for the number.
I'll buy you lunch, Marcus.
No, but this is what we need, this is what we need to hear, so I appreciate that, thank you.
Also more information on the timing. I know Ed, you explained that the timing of these other efforts of looking at the 25% reduction from non-point sources. I would like to see more information on that.
Yeah.
Got it. You guys ready to read the draft test two report and provide us your comments by November 6th? Is that okay?
Yeah.
This is the deadline next week.
So just to be clear, Maya, you're just looking for comments on the past two work, not any.
I'm not asking for any decision on what's proposed. What we would like to do is come to you well before we get to a point of actually having developed an addendum and have expressed explicit consensus through a decision memo along the way. We were tentatively planning on coming to you later in November. That doesn't seem like that's going to be tenable. So perhaps the December meeting, we might be aiming now to get to that point where we can say go, no go. So that we then can develop the addendum with confidence that, you guys support the direction that we're all recommending together.
Should have a little bit more progress on the task 3 portion of the project as well around the December timeframe. So that would provide some additional, hopefully, assurance or information consortium to make sort of that decision point. If we have to punt to January, I think there's a way to do that, but I think we were originally talking between November and December, having that sort of interim decision made by the consortium.
So was that what we were gonna discuss on the November 22nd meeting?
Yeah, yes.
So do we still have to have that? Or?
I think let's plan to have it for now, and I'll send out a cancellation if I don't think we're ready to present anything. That's very likely, I think.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not we have it, I think, we're committed to developing a draft of what that decision memo might look like. And we can provide that way ahead of, the November 20th date or the December.
So you wouldn't have to act on it, but you could see what we're proposing as a decision memo. The other benefit of having a November meeting is we can present to you all the what we're expecting, the draft water quality results for the year. That might be of interest to folks too, since we were on a great path and then we're not sure what it's looking like now. So we have data through August. So it'll be by then, hopefully we'll
have September.
You'll have September data?
Yeah.
No. Which is
well, and if you guys have strong preferences about meeting, not meeting, shoot me an email. I'll take it into consideration. We're trying to be responsive to y'all too. What we did have this like quick succession of meetings, the idea to keep moving this along, and clearly like that pace is not gonna work. So
In that table, Jeff, that you mentioned about the NPS loads by entity, that's something that we could probably create in short order. It's in, you know, the various RA reports and compliance assessment reports, but not as a consolidated one-stop shop.
Do y'all have a preference for us handling those as one-on-one meetings or going over them as a collective?
I think we would probably, once we have all the tables developed for each entity, we'd send that entity the information. Whether or not we need to do like a follow-up one-on-one, we make a call once that information is provided to each entity.
Does that work for you all?
Like, you know, the breadth of the potential issue versus our personal one, or individual ones, but.
I think we've deferred to like the one-on-ones out of respect for you all as individual entities, but if that's not something that serves the group, like.
I want the opportunity to present individually first. I do think we need to have that information and acknowledge sort of the collective effort that might need to be undertaken in Old Tampa Bay, but I want to give the opportunity, especially for entities not here today, to see that information first.
That's fair.
Any other discussion on this item today? All right, thank you, Brandon, appreciate it. It is 12 o'clock. Do we want to take a quick bio break? We haven't run a meeting over noon, it's the past noon in a while, so.
I know, I don't really think we have to talk too much about the remaining items unless you all want to, so. Our main ask for the open discussion was if you have funding needs for any infrastructure, whether it's stormwater or wastewater or otherwise, as a result of hurricanes ruining everything, if you can let us know so that we can add you to a list and advocate for funding within the state and federal level, we would be happy to do that. If you all want to have another conversation about these things, we can, but then I do think we should have a quick break. And then Ed, I didn't know if you wanted to just cover real quickly the news sources, unassigned allocations, future topics.
Well, I think that goes hand in hand with engaging with DEP, because there are some outstanding issues that we need guidance from DEP on in terms of news sources that have been presented or reassignment allocations. That we have got real good feedback from DEP as it stands right now. So that in tandem with a potential recommendation to move to an absolute load and how that would be expressed as a regulatory threshold was something that we need to have DEP weigh in during the consortium.
So quick show of hands, is there, and I know we can't necessarily get everybody on the phone, but would we like to take a break and come back and continue the discussion on 6A and 6B, or are we good for this meeting and want to adjourn for October? Who wants to stay? Who is ready to go? Who wants, I mean, any reason to stay? Just showing hands really quick. Not seeing anything.
So yeah, as Maya emphasized, if you let us know any needs in response to the hurricanes, as it stands for wastewater, stormwater infrastructure, if you let us know, I'm bringing that, our legislative priorities to my board in November, the Estuary Program Management and Policy Board. That serves as a platform once it's vetted there that I can talk to both state and federal elected officials on our core needs within the region. So as Maya mentioned, if you have specific examples of specific needs, please send those along to either Maya or I. And that'll be sort of top of our list when we talk to officials.
Is there anyone on the phone call that has any items for discussion?
No hands raised, no comments in the chat.
Okay, well, last thing then is just a reminder, our remaining meetings scheduled for the year, November 22nd and December 18th, with the November meeting being kind of a check with Maya based on I guess, whether we're ready to advance the discussion or not. I guess you guys will have some individual meetings.
Yeah.
After you put the data set together that was requested for the entities in Old Tampa Bay. Yep. Anything on your end?
All good.
All right, appreciate everybody's time and we'll see you hopefully on the 22nd or December 18th.
Thank you.
Thanks.